Hey everyone. Tonight we are going to set sail into a past that feels both fantastically remote and surprisingly modern. We're heading back to the turn of the 17th century, a time of immense change, burgeoning empires, and the salty spray of unexplored oceans. You are standing on a damp, windswept dock smelling the tar and the tide, about to board a vessel that will change the world. It's not a glorious warship or a nimble explorer's caravel. It's a cheap, ugly, pot-bellied cargo hauler. And let's be honest, given the state of 17th century maritime hygiene, you probably wouldn't survive the journey without contracting at least 3 diseases that sound like they were made up for a fantasy novel. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I always love to see where you're all listening from, so please feel free to post your city and the time of night in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is somewhere in the late 1500s, and you are standing on a wharf in a bustling European port. Let's say it's Lisbon, or perhaps Seville. The air is thick with a symphony of smells. The sharp tang of salt and drying fish, the sweet rot of discarded fruit, the earthy scent of hemp rope, and the unmistakable eye-watering aroma of several hundred sailors who consider a bucket of seawater a full bath. You pull your collar a little tighter against the damp wind and look out at the forest of masts that chokes the harbor. And what you see are monsters. These are the ships that rule the waves, the great carracks and galleons of the Spanish and Portuguese empires. They aren't just vessels, they are floating fortresses, declarations of power carved from oak and pine. You watch as one of them, the São Martinho, is being loaded. Its sides are painted with ornate patterns and a huge gilded lantern hangs from its stern. The ship rises out of the water like a wooden cliff, its forecastle and aft castle towering stories high, giving it a distinctive, top-heavy silhouette. It looks less like it was designed to sail and more like it was meant to intimidate the ocean itself into submission. Cannons, dozens of them, poke from square gun ports along its flanks. You can see soldiers in polished helmets marching on its decks, their pikes glinting in the weak sunlight. This is the very image of maritime supremacy. As a merchant, a person whose livelihood depends on moving goods from point A to point B, you should be impressed. But mostly, you're just frustrated. You run a hand over a nearby bale of wool, your wool, waiting to be loaded. You've calculated the costs a dozen times, and each time the numbers make your stomach clench. A ship like the São Martinho costs a king's ransom to build. All that ornate carving, all that thick reinforced timber designed to withstand cannonballs, it doesn't come cheap. And crewing it? It requires a small army. You need sailors to handle the complex rigging, sure, but you also need soldiers to man the guns, gunners to fire them, carpenters, smiths, a surgeon if you're lucky, and a whole host of officers to keep everyone in line. You're looking at a crew of 200 or 300 men, every single one of whom needs to be paid, fed, and given their ration of grog. It's an operational nightmare, a financial black hole that inhales money, and for what? You walk closer to the gangplank, watching cranes hoist barrels of wine and crates of salted cod into its hold. The problem is there isn't much of a hold. So much of the ship's internal space is dedicated to things that have nothing to do with your cargo. There are powder magazines, gun decks, sprawling quarters for the captain and his officers, and barracks for the soldiers. It's like trying to run a delivery service using an armored limousine. It might be safe, but you can barely fit a few parcels in the trunk. The ratio of cargo space to overall size is, to put it mildly, abysmal. You're repaying a premium to ship your wool in a floating castle that is mostly designed for a war it might never fight. This was the mainstream reality of 16th century shipping. The great maritime powers of the day, Spain and Portugal, built their fleets with a dual purpose in mind. Trade and warfare were two sides of the same gold coin. Every merchant vessel had to be capable of defending itself against pirates, privateers, or the navy of a rival nation. Historians still argue whether the sheer expense of these floating castles was a deliberate form of economic gatekeeping by the Spanish and Portuguese crowns, or simply a reflection of an era where piracy and warfare were inseparable from trade. Either way, the result was the same. Shipping was incredibly expensive, inefficient, and slow. You overhear 2 old sailors talking nearby. One is complaining about a recent voyage where they sprang a leak 100 leagues from shore. He describes the frantic process of fathering where the crew desperately wrestled a spare sailcloth, slathered it with a foul-smelling concoction of tar goat hair and whatever else they could find, and tried to drag it under the hull to plug the hole. It's a desperate, messy, and often futile measure. It reminds you that for all their grandeur, these ships are fragile things, constantly at the mercy of the waves and their own unwieldy design. They're slow, they handle poorly in rough seas, like a top-heavy bathtub toy, and their towering superstructures catch the wind in all the wrong ways. You look back at the galleon, at its proud flags and its bristling cannons, and you see it not as a symbol of power, but as a problem, a puzzle. It's a tool designed for a dozen different jobs, and as a result, it's not particularly good at any of them. It's too expensive to build, too costly to crew, and it doesn't even carry that much stuff. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows from the masts across the cobblestones, a thought crystallizes in your mind. A thought that's beginning to bubble up in the minds of practical, money-focused people in a certain low-lying, waterlogged country to the north. There has to be a better way, a cheaper way. A way to build a ship that is just a ship designed for one thing and one thing only. To carry as much cargo as possible for as little money as possible, even if it is by all accounts ugly as sin. That thought hangs in the salty air as you turn your back on the towering Spanish galleons. There has to be a better way. And as you make the long journey home, the scenery changes, the air grows cooler, and the very land itself feels different. You've returned to the Netherlands, your homeland, and to understand the ship you are about to help create, you first have to understand the strange, precarious place you come from. Your country shouldn't exist. Much of it is a waterlogged pancake of silt and peat, a delta of rivers that would rather be a marsh, large portions of which lie defiantly below sea level. Your nation's motto is essentially, God created the world, but the Dutch created the Netherlands. And you've been arguing with his original water features ever since. Here, water is not a passive feature of the landscape, it is an active participant in your life. It is your highway and your enemy, your source of sustenance and your greatest existential threat. You feel it in the damp air that seeps into your bones. You see it in the canals that serve as streets in your cities, and you hear it in the ever-present creak and groan of the windmills. To an outsider, those windmills are charming, rustic decorations. To you, they are sentinels, soldiers in a never-ending war. Day and night their giant arms turn against the sky not to grind grain, though some do, but to power the pumps that lift water from the low-lying fields, the polders, and dump it back into the rivers and the sea. It's a constant, exhausting, and absolutely essential battle. Living here is an act of perpetual engineering. This endless struggle has forged a unique mindset in your people. You are above all else pragmatic. There is no time for aristocratic frivolity when the sea is trying to reclaim your living room. While other nations were building soaring cathedrals to impress God, you were building really, really good drainage ditches to impress your neighbors by not flooding their tulip fields. This practicality is embedded in your society. For centuries, long before the idea of a unified nation even took hold, your communities were organized into waterschappen, or water boards. These are some of the oldest democratic institutions on the continent. They were councils of local landowners and farmers elected with one purpose: to manage the dikes, dunes, and canals that kept everyone dry. It was a simple, brutal calculus. If you failed to maintain your section of the dike, it wasn't just your farm that flooded, it was everyone's. Your survival depended on collective, rational, and ruthlessly efficient cooperation. Historians still argue whether this famous Dutch pragmatism was a natural cultural trait or a mindset forged in the crucible of this centuries-long, desperate war against the sea. But whatever its origin, the result is a people who look at the world as a series of complex problems to be solved with cleverness and thrift. You don't have mountains full of gold and silver like the Spanish, nor vast tracts of fertile farmland like the French. What you have is mud, wind, water, and an abundance of stubborn ingenuity. This ingenuity is being tested now more than ever, because your other great struggle, second only to the one against the sea, is your fight for independence. You are embroiled in what will one day be called the 80 Years' War, a brutal, sprawling conflict to break free from the control of the mighty Spanish Empire, the same empire whose ostentatious, Inefficient galleons are choking the harbors of Lisbon and Cadiz. They are the ships of your oppressor. Spain is the global superpower, funded by the plunder of the New World. They have the numbers, the money, and the military might. On paper, your rebellion should be impossible. A tiny, sodden nation of merchants and herring fishermen against the full force of the Habsburgs? It's a joke. But you have a plan. You cannot outfight them, so you must out-earn them. Commerce is your weapon. Every shipload of Baltic grain, every barrel of French wine, every bolt of English wool you transport is another nail in the coffin of Spanish rule. Trade is the engine that funds your armies and builds your navies. But to win this economic war, you need an edge. You need to be faster, cheaper, and more efficient than everyone else. You need to squeeze every last drop of profit from every single voyage. And so you look at the sea not with the eyes of a conquistador seeking glory, but with the eyes of an engineer seeking efficiency. The skills your people have honed over generations of fighting the water are suddenly your greatest asset. You understand hydrodynamics from building canal barges and sluice gates. You understand wind power better than anyone on Earth from your windmills. You understand logistics and resource management from the constant need to maintain your dikes. You look at the Spanish galleon, that floating symbol of your enemy's power, and you don't feel intimidated. You feel a flicker of contempt. It's so wasteful. All that wood, all those men, all that expense. For what? To carry a few crates of silver and a lot of aristocratic pride? It's a design born of luxury and imperial might. You need a design born of desperation and economic necessity. The puzzle that began to form in your mind on that foreign dock now has a searing urgency. You don't just want to build a better ship to make money. You need to build a better ship to win a war and save your nation from drowning, one way or another. So with the urgent need for a better, cheaper ship firmly rooted in your mind, you decide to do what any good engineer or entrepreneur would do. You analyze the competition. You need to get up close and personal with the designs you aim to replace, to understand their weaknesses not just from afar, but from the grain of their very timbers. Before the galleon became the gold standard for the Spanish treasure fleets, its slightly older, tubbier ancestor ruled the waves, the carrack. And it is one of these vessels, currently taking on supplies in Amsterdam before a long voyage south, that you decide to inspect. You arrange a visit under the pretense of chartering its cargo space. From the wharf, it looks much like the ships you saw in Lisbon, perhaps a bit less ornate but with the same fundamental design flaws. The first thing you notice as you climb the swaying gangplank is the sheer, unnecessary height. You ascend to a deck that sits high off the water, a defensive feature that also makes loading and unloading a needlessly difficult chore. Once aboard, you have to crane your neck to take it all in. You are standing in the waist, the lowest part of the main deck, and at either end of the ship rise the enormous forecastle and aft castle. These structures are the carrack's defining feature. The aft castle, at the stern, is a multi-decked behemoth that houses the captain's quarters, the navigators, and senior officers. It's practically a self-contained apartment block, complete with balconies and large windows. The forecastle is smaller but still looms over the front of the ship. This is the origin of the floating castle concept you've been pondering. And here, up close, you realize it's meant literally. The design is a direct holdover from medieval land warfare. The quirky truth is that these castles weren't just for show. They were built so that archers and later men with primitive handguns could shoot down onto the decks of enemy ships, just as they would from the walls of a fortress. The entire strategy revolved around getting close to another vessel and dominating it with a hail of projectiles before your soldiers swarmed across to capture it. It is less a naval strategy and more a let us just put a castle on a boat approach to maritime conflict. As a man of commerce, you find this absurd. All that timber, all that weight, all that wind resistance, just to support a tactic you want to avoid at all costs. Fighting is bad for business. You walk the length of the deck, or rather you navigate it. It's a chaotic obstacle course of coiled ropes thick as your arm, spare spars, chicken coops, and a longboat lashed down in the middle of everything. Cannons on heavy wooden carriages take up enormous amounts of space, their muzzles staring blankly out of the gun ports. There's barely a clear path from one end of the ship to the other. You look up at the rigging. 3 or 4 masts tower above you, their mainmasts dominated by huge single square sails. These are the engine of the ship, Powerful when the wind is directly behind you, but almost useless when it's not. Trying to steer this thing against the wind is like trying to convince a cat to enjoy a bath. A lot of noisy, useless effort that gets you nowhere. This is the ship that explorers like Vasco da Gama used to reach India, a mainstream historical fact that lends it a certain mystique. But you know that those famous voyages were often agonizingly long, dictated entirely by the seasonal trade winds. A carrack couldn't fight the wind. It could only wait for it to change. Historians still argue whether the carrack's notoriously poor sailing characteristics, especially its inability to sail well against the wind, were a necessary compromise for its sturdiness or simply a flaw that naval architects of the time hadn't yet figured out how to solve. You suspect it's the latter. Your tour guide, a boisterous first mate, offers to show you the hold. You descend a steep, rickety ladder into the belly of the beast. The air immediately becomes cooler, heavier, and smells of bilge water, damp wood, and the ghosts of 1,000 previous cargoes. And the first thing that strikes you is how small it feels. For a ship this large on the outside, the cargo space is shockingly limited. Massive curved oak ribs line the hull, and huge crossbeams supporting the deck above intrude on the space. The user interface here is terrible. It's all superstructure and no storage, like one of those early computers that was 90% beige plastic case and 10% actual components. You see vast pockets of wasted volume, awkward corners where a barrel can't quite fit, all because the hull was shaped for stability under the weight of its castles, not for maximizing internal capacity. You emerge, blinking, back into the daylight, your mind racing. You've seen enough. The carrack is a magnificent, prestigious, and historically significant failure of design, at least from your perspective. It costs too much to build because of its redundant castles. It costs too much to operate because it needs hundreds of sailors and soldiers. It's slow and unresponsive, beholden to the whims of the wind, and after all that, it barely carries enough cargo to justify the voyage. You thank the first mate for his time, making a non-committal gesture about chartering space you have no intention of ever renting. As you step back onto the solid, unmoving ground of the wharf, your conclusion is stark and clear. The problem isn't that the carrack needs to be improved. You don't need a better version of this. You need a rejection of it. To win the economic war, you have to throw out the entire floating castle philosophy. You need to get rid of the soldiers, get rid of the cannons, get rid of the towering superstructures, and dedicate every spare inch of wood, every guilder of investment, to the one thing that actually matters: the cargo. It's a radical idea, because a ship without defenses is just a tempting target in a very dangerous world. Your footsteps echo on the cobblestones as you walk away from the docks, the image of the clumsy, inefficient carrack burning in your mind. The solution seems so obvious. Strip it down. Remove the castles, the cannons, the soldiers. Build for capacity, not for conflict. It's a clean, elegant, logical idea that blossoms in the quiet of your thoughts. But as you turn a corner, leaving the scent of the sea behind for the familiar smells of the city, a harsh reality begins to seep in, chilling your enthusiasm. A ship without defenses? In this world? It's a beautiful theory, but it would last about 10 minutes on the open ocean. The shipping lanes of your time are less like highways and more like a demolition derby held in a shark tank. You sit down in your quiet counting house, a map of the known world spread on the table before you. Every route is a vein of potential profit, but every league of sea is teeming with predators. You are intimately familiar with the dangers, not as abstract concepts, but as line items in your ledgers. Cargo lost to pirates, crew ransomed, ship scuttled. The word pirate itself is insufficient. It's too simple. It doesn't capture the sheer variety of threats that lurk over the horizon. First, there are the common criminals, the desperate motley crews of outcasts and mutineers from every nation, sailing under their own terrifying flags. Their business plan is simple: hostile takeover followed by an aggressive liquidation of all assets, including the staff. They are a constant, unpredictable menace, appearing from a fog bank or a hidden cove to swarm a vessel that has strayed from a convoy or been crippled by a storm. They are the wolves of the sea, and they have a keen eye for easy prey. Then there's a more complicated and in some ways more dangerous category: the privateer. You've seen the documents yourself. A letter of marque, an official-looking piece of parchment with a royal seal that grants a private captain the legal right to attack and plunder the shipping of an enemy nation. It's state-sanctioned piracy. A privateer is just a pirate with good paperwork and a better public relations team. Your English trading partners speak of Sir Francis Drake as a national hero, the man who singed the King of Spain's beard. But to your Spanish business contacts, he is El Drake, the dragon, a bloodthirsty pirate who ransacked their colonies. Historians still argue whether the line between a heroic privateer and a common pirate was one of genuine patriotic duty, or simply a matter of which flag you flew and whether your government was winning the war. For you, a merchant trying to get a shipment of timber from Riga to Amsterdam, the distinction is academic. When a ship full of armed men is bearing down on you, you don't stop to ask if their rampage is legally authorized. And even more terrifying are the state-sponsored predators, for whom piracy is not just an opportunity, but an entire economic model. On the route south into the Mediterranean, you have to contend with the Barbary corsairs. Operating from the North African ports of Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli, these sailors are the boogeymen of the age. They are brilliant seamen, often in fast oar-powered galleys that can operate even when there is no wind. Their goal is not just to steal your cargo, but to steal you. Crews captured by the corsairs are dragged to the slave markets of North Africa to be sold to the highest bidder or held for a ruinous ransom that could bankrupt your entire enterprise. This isn't random crime. It's a systematic, highly organized industry of terror that has plagued Christian shipping for centuries. Now suddenly the design of that bulky carrack doesn't seem so absurd. Those high castles you scoffed at? They are incredibly difficult to board from a smaller, lower pirate ship. Those dozens of soldiers you saw as a waste of space? They are the only thing standing between your crew and a lifetime of slavery. Those cannons you wanted to remove? They are the teeth and claws that might just scare the wolves away. The carrack and the galleon are designed for this brutal environment. Their very appearance is a form of insurance, a declaration that they will be a costly and difficult target. Predators, on sea as on land, prefer to hunt the sick, the slow, and the defenseless. This is the great, seemingly unsolvable dilemma of your business. Safety is expensive. It costs you in crew and construction, and most critically in the cargo space you sacrifice for defenses. To be efficient is to be vulnerable. To be safe is to be unprofitable. It feels like a protection racket on a global scale, where the price of admission to the world's oceans is a willingness to turn your merchant ship into a second-rate warship. You stare at the map, at the treacherous waters of the English Channel, the pirate-infested Bay of Biscay, the corsair-haunted Straits of Gibraltar. Your dream of a stripped-down, cargo-maximized vessel seems like a lamb you are designing for a slaughterhouse. It's a suicidal fantasy. And yet, the numbers are just so compelling. The potential profits from a ship that could carry twice the cargo with half the crew are astronomical. It would be a revolution. If you could just find a way to manage the risk. If you could build a sheep that was somehow impossibly wolf-proof, or at least a sheep that was so fast, so nimble, or so unattractive to wolves that it could survive. The problem is far more complex than just redesigning a hull. You have to redesign the entire relationship between commerce and conflict at sea. And as you ponder this, your eyes drift north on the map to a narrow strait of water that holds another kind of predator. Not a pirate, but a king with his hand held out. Your finger traces a path on the map, away from the pirate-infested waters of the south and up towards the cold gray expanse of the Baltic Sea. This, you know, is the real heart of your nation's wealth. The glamorous spices from the East Indies get all the attention, but the Baltic trade is the bedrock. It's the mother of all trades. From these shores comes the cheap, plentiful grain that feeds your rapidly growing cities, preventing famine and social unrest. From these forests comes the tall, straight timber and naval stores, tar, pitch, hemp, that you need to build the thousands of ships that are the lifeblood of your republic. Without the Baltic, there is no Dutch enterprise. But to get there, you have to pass through a needle's eye. Your finger stops at the narrow channel separating Denmark and the Scandinavian peninsula, the Øresund, the Sound. There is no other way in or out. It is the world's most critical strategic choke point, and it is controlled completely and utterly by the King of Denmark. And he has his hand out. You remember the first time you made the passage yourself. The nervous energy on deck as you approached the Danish coast. And then, looming out of the misty shoreline, the site of Kronborg Castle at Helsingør. It is a grim, formidable fortress of stone and cannon, a future inspiration for Shakespeare's Hamlet. But for you and every other merchant, it is simply the most expensive toll booth in the world. For more than a century, the Danish crown has levied the Sound toll, a tax on every single ship that passes. It is the kingdom's primary source of revenue, and the castle's guns are there to ensure compliance. It's the 16th century equivalent of a mandatory, incredibly expensive subscription fee just to use the main highway. As your ship dropped anchor, you watched as the Danish officials were rowed out. You remember the feeling of helpless frustration as they boarded, carrying their ropes and measuring sticks. Because the toll was not based on the value of your cargo, or the length of your ship or its tonnage. It was based on one seemingly arbitrary metric: the width of your main deck at its widest point. This single rule has created a nightmare of creative bureaucracy. You watched the inspectors at work. They were notorious for their tricks. The quirky but infuriating tidbit whispered in every tavern from Amsterdam to Danzig was that they would sometimes soak their measuring ropes in water overnight, causing them to shrink just enough to add a few imaginary feet to your ship's beam. They would measure from the outside of the hull, carefully including any decorative carvings or rubbing strakes to maximize the width. These guys were the original masters of creative accounting, only they used a measuring tape instead of a ledger. You had to stand there, smile politely, and pay a tax based on a system that made about as much sense as judging a book by how wide it is. It tells you nothing about the quality or the content, but it's very easy to measure if you're lazy. On any single voyage, the toll is a painful but manageable cost of doing business. But you aren't thinking about a single voyage. You are a Dutch merchant. Your entire business model is based on volume, on sending hundreds, even thousands of ships back and forth year after year. Each vessel is making a round trip, paying the toll on the way in and on the way out. When you add it all up, the Sound toll is a catastrophic drain on your profits. A river of Dutch guilders flowing directly into the Danish king's treasury. Historians still argue whether the Sound toll was a parasitic drain on European trade that stifled growth, or a stabilizing force that helped fund the policing and charting of these vital but dangerous northern waters. Standing on that deck, handing over a pouch of silver for a measurement you knew was dishonest, you certainly knew which side of the argument you were on. Now, back in your counting house, you stare at the map and connect the pieces of the puzzle. The threats of the sea are pushing you in two completely opposite directions. The pirates, privateers, and corsairs of the Atlantic demand a ship that is wide and stable, with a broad, spacious deck that can serve as a fighting platform for cannons and soldiers. A floating fortress. But the Danish taxman at Kronborg demands the exact opposite. He wants you to arrive in a vessel that is as narrow on deck as a canoe to keep your tax bill down. The perfect ship for surviving the journey to Spain is the worst possible ship for profiting from the trade to Poland. It's an impossible contradiction. You're being squeezed between the violent chaos of the open ocean and the bureaucratic extortion of the Baltic. You lean back in your chair, the wood groaning in the quiet room. You can't build two separate fleets, it's too expensive. You need one design that can navigate this complex web of threats. Your mind drifts away from the idea of fighting pirates. That's the old way of thinking. That's the Carrick's way. What if the solution isn't about confrontation, but about avoidance? Economic avoidance. A strange idea begins to form, a spark of pure, unadulterated, tax-dodging genius. What if you gave the Danish king exactly what he was asking for? A ship with a ridiculously narrow deck. But what if that narrow deck sat atop a hull that was enormous? What if you designed a ship that was skinny on top but wide, deep, and bulbous below the waterline? A ship that, to the eyes of the corrupt inspector with his shrinking rope, looked small and cheap, but that could secretly hold a vast amount of cargo in its belly. A ship that looks unstable, even ugly, but is perfectly designed to legally cheat the system. It would be a floating loophole, a masterpiece of malicious compliance built of wood and sail. The idea lodges in your mind, not as a fleeting fantasy, but as a concrete, actionable business plan. A ship built as a floating loophole, but an idea, no matter how brilliant, is just vapor. To turn it into timber and tar, You need expertise and capital. You are a merchant, not a shipwright. So you travel to the city of Hoorn. Hoorn is one of the jewels of West Friesland, a bustling port city that curves along the shore of the Zuiderzee. It's not as large or as powerful as Amsterdam, but it has a proud maritime tradition and some of the most innovative shipyards in the Netherlands. Here, in a smoky wood-paneled room above a warehouse, you gather a consortium of the willing. There are other merchants like you, men who have also grimaced while paying the Danish king his due. There are grizzled sea captains who know the Atlantic winds and the Baltic shoals better than their own parlors. And most importantly, there are the master shipwrights, the men with calloused hands and minds as sharp as their adzes who can turn a drawing into a deep sea vessel. There are no admirals in this room, no nobles discussing matters of national prestige. The mood is less for glory in the fatherland, and more how can we depreciate this asset over a 10-year period while maximizing return on investment. You lay out your proposal, and it is a list of design specifications that flies in the face of centuries of shipbuilding tradition. You are essentially handing the shipwrights a list that reads like a modern budget airline's business plan. No frills, cram in as much as possible, and keep the overheads rock bottom. First, you tell them the ship must be designed around its cargo hold. The hold is not a feature, it is the entire point of the vessel's existence. Every other element must be subservient to maximizing that space. Second, it must be operable by the smallest possible crew. Labor is one of your biggest expenses, and the ongoing war with Spain means able-bodied sailors are always in short supply. The rigging, the layout, everything must be simplified for ease of use. Third, and this is the revolutionary part, the main deck must be narrow, almost absurdly so, while the hull beneath it must be as wide and spacious as they can possibly make it. And fourth, it must be cheap. You specify using pine and fir for much of the construction, which is more plentiful and less expensive than the heavy oak favored for warships. And when you say no ornamentation, you mean it. No gilded lanterns, no intricate carvings of lions or saints on the stern. If a piece of wood doesn't help the ship float or hold cargo, it's a waste of money. You are commissioning a cargo container, not a float for the Rose Parade. This is the birth of a ship designed by accountants, not admirals. For the first time, the primary design inputs are not military tactics or imperial grandeur, but financial calculations. The success of this vessel will not be measured in the number of cannons it carries, or the battles it wins, but by its cost per ton of cargo, moved its crew-to-cargo ratio, and its tax liability at the Sound. It is the ultimate expression of your people's pragmatic, commercial ethos. This entire venture is a classic example of the Dutch way. It isn't a grand, state-funded project. It's a private enterprise, a quirky but powerful example of 16th-century venture capital. You and your partners are pooling your own funds, sharing the risk in the hope of a massive reward. Historians still argue whether the Fluyt, as this ship will come to be called, was the brainchild of a single visionary shipwright, like the oft-credited Peter Jan Sleorn of Hoorn, or the result of a more gradual collaborative evolution among the shipyards of North Holland. Standing in this room, it feels like a bit of both. The seed of the idea may have come from one man, but it is being nurtured and refined by the collective practical wisdom of the group. You can see the master shipwright mulling it over, stroking his beard as he studies your crude drawings. Every instinct he has is screaming in protest. A ship with a narrow deck and a wide, bulging hull sounds dangerously unstable, prone to capsizing. A simplified rigging for a skeleton crew on a ship that will cross the notoriously stormy Bay of Biscay seems like a death sentence. And a merchant ship with virtually no defensive armament? It's madness. He has spent his life building sturdy, reliable vessels in the traditional way. What you are asking for is a freak, an ugly, misshapen aberration. But he is also a Dutchman. He understands the cold, hard logic of the numbers you are showing him. He sees the potential profit, and you are offering him and his shipyard a lucrative contract to build not just one, but a whole series of these strange new vessels if the prototype is successful. The challenge, the sheer audacity of it, appeals to his engineer soul. After a long silence, punctuated by the distant cry of gulls and the hammering from the shipyard, a deal is struck. The plans will be drawn up, the timbers will be selected. You and your partners leave the meeting, the scent of pipe smoke clinging to your clothes, a nervous excitement in the air. You have placed your bet. You have put your faith and your fortune into a radical concept, that in the coming century the mastery of the seas will belong not to the nation with the most powerful warships, but to the one with the most efficient spreadsheets. The age of the floating castle is ending. The age of the floating warehouse is about to begin. Months pass. The ink on the contracts has long since dried, and your investment has been slowly transforming from a pile of guilders into a pile of timber. The sounds of the horn shipyard, the rhythmic rasp of the pit saw, the staccato beat of 100 hammers, the shouts of foremen over the North Sea wind, have become the background music to your life. Today, the work has progressed enough for you to see it. Not as a blueprint, not as a scale model, but as a full-sized reality. You walk through the shipyard, a chaotic landscape of wood shavings, steaming tar pots, and the skeletal ribs of half-finished vessels. And then you see it, resting on massive wooden stocks, its full form visible from keel to deck. Your ship. And your first thought is, my goodness, it's ugly. It has none of the proud, intimidating posture of the carracks or galleons you're used to. It doesn't soar, it squats. It looks less like a predator of the high seas and more like a humble beast of burden. It looks less like a mighty vessel and more like a pregnant guppy. You half expect it to be followed by a school of smaller, even uglier boats. But as you get closer, you begin to appreciate the strange, revolutionary genius of its form. Because you can see the entire hull, you can see the secret. You start at the bottom. The keel is long and the bottom of the hull is remarkably flat, designed to give it stability and a shallow draft, allowing it to navigate coastal waters and harbors that deeper ships couldn't access. From this flat bottom, the sides curve outwards dramatically, creating a wide, round, almost barrel-like belly. This is the ship's heart. Its cavernous, uninterrupted cargo hold, far larger than any ship of a comparable size has ever seen before. This is where the money will be made. But it's what happens above this bulging belly that is truly bizarre. About 2/3 of the way up, where the hull is at its widest, the timbers begin to curve sharply inward. This feature is called the tumble home. The sides of the ship slope in on themselves as they rise, culminating in a main deck that is startlingly narrow. The entire cross-section of the ship is the shape of a pear, bulbous and round at the bottom, tapering to a skinny neck at the top. The design philosophy is pure business in the front, party in the back, except here it's narrow deck for the tacksman, enormous belly for the cargo. You walk the length of the ship, marveling at the audacity of it. You remember the carrack, with its V-shaped hull and its tall, imposing, nearly vertical sides. That was a ship designed to be a stable platform for cannons, a fortress wall on the water. This is something else entirely. It looks almost organic, like some strange sea creature, and profoundly unconventional. The shipwrights have even given it a name, the Fluyt. It's a quirky, almost ironic name. A Fluyt is a flute, the long, slender musical instrument. Calling this pot-bellied ship a flute is a masterclass in 16th century sarcastic branding. It's like calling a sumo wrestler tiny. This radical shape shouldn't work. By all conventional wisdom, a ship so round on the bottom and so narrow on top should be incredibly unstable, prone to rolling violently in heavy seas. And yet, the shipwrights, through careful calculation and generations of accumulated knowledge, have balanced the design perfectly. The flat bottom and the sheer volume of cargo in the hold will give it a low center of gravity, making it surprisingly steady once it's in the water and laden. Naval historians still argue whether the Fluyt's remarkable seaworthiness was a happy accident of its tax-evading design, or the result of incredibly sophisticated, intuitive hydrodynamic calculations by its builders. Looking at the deliberate and careful craftsmanship, you suspect it's the latter. There is no beauty here in the traditional sense. The pine planks are functional, not fine. The lines are pragmatic, not graceful. It is the physical embodiment of the brief you and your partners laid out in that smoky room months ago. It is a tool, stripped of all vanity, but as your eyes trace the curve of that enormous belly, and you begin to calculate the sheer volume of rye, timber, or salt it could contain, you feel a different kind of aesthetic appreciation. You then look up at that narrow deck, and you picture the Danish tax inspector in Kronborg, his shrunken rope unable to find purchase on the inward-sloping hull, forced to record a measurement that belies the ship's true capacity. A slow smile spreads across your face. It may be ugly to an admiral, but to a merchant, it's the most beautiful thing you have ever seen. It is the shape of efficiency. It is the shape of profit. Now you just need to figure out how to make it move. You stand there in the Horn shipyard, admiring the strange, beautiful economics of that pear-shaped hull. The solution to the cargo problem and the tax problem is right there in front of you, resting on its stocks. But solving half the problem isn't enough. Your gaze travels upward past the bulging sides and the narrow deck to the towering masts that have been hoisted into place. This is where the next part of your revolution will take place. This is how you will attack the single greatest operating expense of any voyage: the crew. On the carrack you inspected, the masts were stout, thick pillars of oak, designed to support the immense strain of a few colossal sails. The rigging was a bewildering cat's cradle of heavy hemp ropes, as thick as a man's arm. Handling a single one of its giant sails in a rising wind was a monumental task, a brutal contest of brute force that required dozens of sailors heaving and straining in unison. It was inefficient, expensive, and dangerous. Your Fluyt, by contrast, takes a completely different approach. Its masts are taller and more slender. They look almost delicate in comparison. This isn't a weakness, it's a feature. The height allows the shipwrights to divide the total sail area into smaller, far more manageable sections. Instead of one gigantic, unwieldy mainsail, the Fluyt carries 3 sails on its mainmast: a main course at the bottom, a topsail above it, and a top-gallant sail at the very top. It's the difference between trying to carry one giant, king-sized mattress through a doorway by yourself versus moving a stack of smaller, easily handled cushions. The Fluyt's designers chose the cushions. This sail plan is a game-changer. When the wind picks up, you don't need a massive team of sailors to wrestle with a single behemoth sail. A small team can simply furl the upper, most exposed sails, leaving the lower ones to catch the breeze. It allows for a much finer degree of control over the ship's speed and handling, all while requiring a fraction of the manpower. The entire system is designed for ease of use, a critical factor when your crew is small and overworked. But the sails themselves are only half the story. The real secret, the quirky technological magic that makes it all possible, is hidden in plain sight all over the deck. It's the block and tackle. The ship is fitted with the latest in pulley technology. Intricate systems of ropes running through wooden wheel-fitted blocks are positioned at the base of the masts and on the yards. These are simple machines, but their effect is profound. They are force multipliers. A single sailor pulling on the end of a rope threaded through a series of pulleys can now hoist a heavy yard or trim a sail with an ease that would have required 5 men just a generation earlier. The whole ship is rigged like the ultimate garage workshop, with pulley systems everywhere to make lifting heavy things a breeze. It's the 16th century version of work smarter, not harder. Maritime historians still argue whether these rigging innovations were developed specifically for the Fluyt, or if the Fluyt was simply the first ship to successfully integrate a variety of pre-existing experimental sail plans and mechanical advances into a single commercially viable design. Either way, the result on your ship is undeniable. You can see it in the thoughtful placement of every line and every winch. The layout of the deck is cleaner, more logical than the chaotic obstacle course you saw on the carrack. Everything is designed to reduce the number of steps a sailor has to take, to make every action as efficient as possible. And this all leads to the number that truly makes your merchant's heart sing. A traditional ship of this size might require a sailing crew of 30, 40, or even more men, not even counting the soldiers it would carry for defense. Your Fluyt, with its simplified sail plan and its labor-saving pulley systems, can be effectively managed by a crew of about 10 to 12. It's a staggering reduction. You've just cut your wage bill, your food and water provisions, and the amount of space dedicated to crew quarters by more than half, maybe by as much as 2/3. The goal was to have a crew so small that everyone knew each other's names, dietary restrictions, and most annoying habits by the end of the first week. You now see the ship not as separate parts, but as a holistic system, a masterpiece of integrated design. The pear-shaped hull maximizes cargo and minimizes taxes. The advanced rigging maximizes sail power and minimizes crew costs. Every element works in concert with the others, all aimed at a single goal: cutting expenses and boosting profit. It's a lean, mean, money-making machine. It is still undeniably ugly by the standards of the day, but its inner workings are a thing of pure, logical beauty. You have your floating warehouse, you have your skeleton crew to run it. Now you just have to confront the final, terrifying question. What happens when the wolves come knocking? The ship is finished. It has been launched into the gray waters of the Zuiderzee, and you are standing on its deck for its maiden voyage. A new ship smell, a mix of fresh pine, Stockholm tar, and damp hemp, fills the air. UV decided its first trial will be a run to the Baltic to pick up a cargo of grain from Danzig. It's a fitting test. This vessel was conceived as a direct response to the economic pressures of the Baltic trade, so it's time to see if the theory holds water. As you sail north, you feel the rhythm of this strange new creation. The small crew, a dozen souls in total, moves with quiet efficiency. They are busier than they would be on a larger ship, certainly, but the simplified rigging and labor-saving tackle make their work manageable. Below your feet, the vast empty hold rumbles and creaks, a cavern of untapped potential. But on deck, it feels almost claustrophobic. The inward-sloping tumble home of the hull means the main deck is a narrow walkway, with barely enough room for two people to pass comfortably. Every time you walk its length, you are reminded of just how radical this design is. After days at sea, the familiar landmark appears on the horizon, the imposing towers of Kronborg Castle. This is the moment of truth. This is the final exam for which this entire ship was designed. You watch as the Danish guard ship signals for you to drop anchor and await inspection. A knot of anticipation tightens in your stomach. It's one thing to have a clever idea in a shipyard in Horn. It's another thing entirely to face down the king of Denmark's tax collectors. The tollmaster's longboat is rowed out and the officials climb aboard. You greet them with a polite nod. You see their eyes sweep over your vessel. They notice the lack of ornamentation, the slender masts, and the conspicuously tiny crew. You can see a flicker of what looks like professional disdain on their faces. This ship doesn't look prestigious or powerful. It looks cheap. It looks insignificant. And that is exactly what you want them to think. They unroll their measuring rope. This is the crucial moment. One official holds the end at the port side railing while the other walks it across the deck. You hold your breath. The shipwright, in a final, quirky stroke of malicious compliance, had built the ship's main railings not at the absolute edge of the deck, but a few inches inside the outermost planking. It was a subtle detail, sacrificing a sliver of walkable space to further shrink the ship's legally taxable width. The officials stretched the rope taut across the narrowest point. The head inspector squints at the measurement, then barks out a number. It is a stunningly, beautifully, wonderfully small number. You can see the confusion on his face. He's looking at his measuring rope, then at your narrow deck, then down at the wide, fat curve of the hull visible just above the waterline, suspecting he's being tricked but not knowing how. It's like watching someone try to figure out a magic trick. But he is a bureaucrat, not a naval architect. His job is to follow the rules, and the rules for centuries have been clear. The toll is based on the width of the deck. You have presented him with a ship that follows the letter of the law while completely demolishing its spirit. This ship is the architectural equivalent of hiding all your assets in a tax haven that happens to be located in the ship's own basement. Historians still argue whether the Danish authorities at Kronborg were genuinely fooled by the Fluyt's design for a significant period, or if they simply accepted the lower toll as a pragmatic way to ensure the massive volume of Dutch trade and the revenue it generated even at a reduced rate continued to flow through their strait. Perhaps they knew they were being outsmarted, but realized that a small tax from 1,000 Dutch ships was better than a large tax from 100 of their competitors. The toll is calculated, and when the number is presented to you, you have to actively suppress a grin. It's a pittance. It is a fraction of what you would have paid for a traditional vessel with the same cargo capacity. The savings on this single passage alone are enough to pay the wages for half your crew for the entire voyage. You hand over the pouch of silver, receive your clearance, and give the order to weigh anchor. The feeling of sailing away from Kronborg having paid next to nothing is one of the purest forms of joy, a 17th century merchant can experience. It's even better than the smell of freshly minted silver. Your tax evasion deck has worked beyond your wildest dreams. This single feature, born from a desire to circumvent an oppressive toll, is about to give your nation an almost insurmountable economic advantage. You will be able to transport Baltic goods cheaper than the English, the French, the Hanseatic cities, cheaper than anyone. But your victory here was a battle of wits. You beat the system. Now you have to load your ship with valuable grain and sail home, back through the North Sea, where the predators don't follow rules or carry measuring tapes. You sail out from the narrow confines of the Sound, leaving the frustrated Danish tax collectors in your wake. Your Fluyt, now sitting low and steady in the water, its belly full of Polish grain, feels like a different ship. It is no longer just a clever idea. It is a vessel laden with value, a floating vault of commodities, and with that value comes risk. On the journey out, you were an empty shell, of little interest to anyone. Now, on the journey home, you are a target. This is the part of the voyage where, on a traditional carrack, the soldiers would be checking their muskets and the gun crews would be readying their cannons. You look around your clean, uncluttered deck. There are no cannons. There are no soldiers. Aside from perhaps a few muskets locked in a cabin and a small swivel gun on the stern for scaring off overly optimistic boarders, your ship is utterly defenseless in a conventional sense. This is the final, most audacious piece of your revolutionary design, the willful rejection of onboard security. It's a decision that seems, on its face, like pure madness. It's like opening a bank and deciding not to hire any guards. But it is not madness, it is a cold, hard calculation. Remember the carrack? It was a compromise, a part-time warship and a part-time cargo hauler. And because it tried to be both, it excelled at neither. You have chosen to specialize. You have removed the apparatus of war, and in doing so, you have liberated your ship. Cannons are immensely heavy. A single large cannon could weigh thousands of pounds. A full battery, along with cannonballs, gunpowder, and reinforced decking to support it all, adds dozens of tons of dead weight to a vessel. By removing it, you have made your Fluyt significantly lighter. This lightness, combined with its efficient sail plan, makes the Fluyt surprisingly quick for a ship of its size. It cannot outrun a dedicated warship like a frigate, but it can certainly outrun the lumbering, pirate-retrofitted merchantmen that are the most common threat. So, your primary defense is simply to run. The Fluyt's official defensive strategy could be called the Brave Sir Robin. When danger reared its ugly head, it bravely turned its tail and fled. You cannot win a fight, so the only rational strategy is to avoid one at all costs. Your second, more subtle defense is to be an unattractive target. Your ship is so unadorned and brutally functional, it practically screams, "Nothing to see here, folks, just hauling some very boring wheat." The ship full of gold is that shiny, slow one over there. Pirates and privateers are businessmen of a sort. They are also calculating risk versus reward. Attacking a well-defended galleon is dangerous, but the potential prize, silver from the New World, silks from Asia, is immense. Attacking your Fluyt is far less risky, but the reward is a few hundred tons of bulk grain or timber. It's a commodity that is difficult to sell in a pirate cove and not nearly as glamorous as a chest of gold doubloons. You've made your ship the shipping equivalent of a delivery van in a world of armored cars. Your third line of defense is a quirky result of the Fluyt's hull design. Its flat bottom gives it a shallow draft, meaning it can sail in waters that are too shallow for larger, deep-hulled vessels. If you are pursued near a coastline, your captain has an option unavailable to his enemies. He can make a run for the shoals. He can navigate into shallow estuaries over sandbars and into coastal wetlands where a heavier, cannon-laden pirate ship would run aground. It's a clever use of terrain, the nautical equivalent of a nimble getaway car losing a pursuing truck in a maze of narrow back alleys. Of course, this is all a gamble. Historians still argue whether the decision to build Fluyts largely unarmed was a stroke of calculated economic genius, or a desperate gamble that simply paid off more often than it failed, with the many lost ships being forgotten as the cost of doing business. You are betting that over the course of 100 voyages, the money saved by eliminating soldiers, cannons, and gunpowder, and the extra profit earned from more cargo and faster trips will far outweigh the value of the few ships that are inevitably caught and lost. It is a brutal, unsentimental statistical approach to sea travel. Standing on the deck, you scan the horizon, a knot of vulnerability in your gut. Every sail that appears is a potential threat. You don't have the reassuring thunder of cannons to rely on. All you have is your ship's speed, its agility, and the shrewd calculation that you are not worth the trouble. You have traded security for efficiency, brute force for economic logic. And as you will soon demonstrate to the rest of the world, it is one of the most profitable bets ever made. Your journey home is tense but uneventful. You see other sails, but none give chase. Your gamble for this one voyage has paid off spectacularly. You arrive in the port of Amsterdam, your hold filled to the brim with high-quality Baltic grain, and the numbers on your ledger are even better than you had hoped. Your investors are ecstatic. The profit margin is unprecedented. The immediate, unanimous conclusion is not just one of celebration, but of replication. The order goes out. Build more. The scene shifts. A few years have passed. You are no longer on the deck of a single experimental ship. You are standing in the cupola of the Oude Kerk, the old church, looking out over the city of Amsterdam and its bustling harbor on the IJ. The view is a testament to the revolution you helped start. Below you is a dense, sprawling forest of masts, thicker and more numerous than ever before. And your eyes, now expertly trained, can easily pick out the distinctive squat profiles of the Fluyts. There are dozens of them. Some are unloading grain and timber, their decks swarming with dock workers. Others, fully laden, are being warped out into the channel, their sails catching the wind as they join the endless procession heading east. You are witnessing the wholesale takeover of Europe's most important economic artery, the Baltic trade. This is the modernagoti, the mother trade, and it has become your nation's exclusive playground. It lacks the exotic glamour of the spice trade, but you know it is infinitely more important. It is the bedrock of the Dutch Golden Age. Your fleets of Fluyts, operating with ruthless efficiency, have created a torrent of wealth that flows into the canals of this very city. The strategy is simple and overwhelming. You ship grain, mountains of it, rye and wheat from Poland and Prussia, bought for low prices and transported in your Fluyt's massive holds. You bring it back to Amsterdam, which has become the granary of Europe. When harvests fail in Spain or Italy and prices skyrocket, it is your ships that arrive to sell them grain at a handsome profit. You control the continent's food security. Then there is the timber, towering pines and sturdy oaks from the forests of Norway and the eastern Baltic, all hauled in your specialized cargo carriers. You bring it here to build your houses, your flood barriers, and most importantly, to build more ships. You've created a brilliant business model. Use your cheap ships to import cheap wood to build more cheap ships to import more cheap wood. It's the 17th century equivalent of an infinite money glitch, and the Fluyt is the perfect tool for this job. Its advantages, which seemed theoretical on that maiden voyage, are now playing out on a massive, undeniable scale. Because your construction costs are lower, your crew is smaller, and your sound toll is a fraction of your rivals, you can offer shipping rates that no one else can possibly match. The other European merchants trying to compete in the Baltic are like a local taxi company trying to compete with Uber after it's already taken over the city. The prices are just impossibly low. Your rivals see these ugly, tubby ships and probably laugh, right up until the moment they go bankrupt. The sheer scale of your operation is a weapon in itself. This is a quirky, often overlooked fact. At the height of this period, it's estimated that more than 1,000 Dutch ships were passing through the Danish Sound every year. You haven't just entered the market, you have flooded it. You are not just competing with the old powers of the Baltic, the German cities of the Hanseatic League. You are systematically dismantling their centuries-old trading networks. Historians still argue whether the Dutch dominance in the Baltic was a direct cause of the relative economic stagnation of the Hanseatic League in the 17th century, or if the League was already in decline for internal reasons. Standing here, watching your endless parade of ships, it's hard to believe you aren't the primary cause. From this high vantage point, the individual vulnerability of a single unarmed Fluyt seems less important. You see it now as a numbers game on a continental scale. A few ships will be lost to pirates or storms, yes. That is the cost of doing business. But for everyone that is lost, 100 will complete their voyages safely, each one generating a steady, reliable profit. It is a system of overwhelming economic force. You have seized control of the trade in the two most fundamental commodities a civilization needs: the food that feeds its people and the wood that builds its world. This steady, immense cash flow from the mother trade is the foundation upon which everything else will be built. It will fund your armies in the war against Spain. It will finance the construction of the beautiful canals and gabled houses of your city. And it will provide the capital for even more ambitious and far more dangerous ventures across the globe. The Baltic is yours. Now it's time to show the rest of the world what your cheap, ugly ship can do. The wealth from the Baltic trade is transformative. It flows back into the Netherlands not as a trickle but as a flood, filling the coffers of your merchant consortiums and funding an explosion of art, science, and engineering. But you are a Dutch merchant. The concept of enough is pleasantly foreign to you. This vast new capital isn't for hoarding, it's for reinvesting. You now have a proven tool, the Fluyt, and a winning formula. The question is no longer how to conquer the Baltic, but how to apply this same overwhelming economic pressure to the rest of Europe. You quickly realize that the greatest profits are not just in carrying your own goods but in carrying everyone else's, and so you become a freighter, the 17th century equivalent of a global shipping company. Your Fluyts, now being mass-produced in the shipyards of the Zaan region, become the ubiquitous delivery vans of the European coast. Your business pitch to the rest of Europe is simple and brutally effective. Why bother with the hassle and expense of owning your own ships? Just use ours. It's cheaper. Trust us. It's the most polite and profitable economic invasion in history. Imagine you are a wine merchant in Bordeaux. You need to get your vintage to a thirsty market in London. You could charter a French or an English ship. It will be a sturdy, seaworthy vessel, but it will have a large crew to pay and a limited hold. The freight rate will be high, cutting into your profits. Then one of your Fluyts sails into the harbor. Its captain offers to transport your wine for a price that is 30, 40, sometimes even 50% lower than the competition. How is this possible? Because his ship was cheaper to build, it pays less in tolls, and it operates with a crew of 12 while the English ship needs 30. You, the French merchant, have no choice. You charter the Dutch ship. The Dutch captain makes a tidy profit and you save a fortune. The only person who loses is the English ship owner who is left sitting empty at the dock. Now multiply this scenario by 1,000. It's happening in every major port on the continent. Your Fluyts are hauling salt from the Bay of Biscay, herring from the North Sea, wool from England, iron from Sweden, and marble from Italy. You have become the indispensable middlemen, the freight haulers of Europe. An English merchant watching a Dutch Fluyt get chartered to carry English wool to Portugal must have felt a very confusing mix of admiration for the low price and deep patriotic resentment. It's not just about price, it's about reliability. You pioneer a quirky but revolutionary system that becomes known as the Bertvaart. It's a network of regularly scheduled shipping routes. A merchant in Hamburg knows that a Dutch ship sails for Amsterdam, not just sometime this month, but every Friday at dawn, weather permitting. This predictability is a massive innovation. It allows businesses to manage their inventory, plan their finances, and reduce the uncertainty that plagues long-distance trade. This wasn't just shipping, it was logistics. You invented the concept of a scheduled international bus service, but with more scurvy and much bigger boats. Of course, the Fluyt is the star of this show, but it's part of a larger, incredibly sophisticated system. Economists and historians still argue whether the Dutch success was primarily due to technological superiority, with ships like the Fluyt, or to their more advanced financial systems, such as the Amsterdam Stock Exchange and the Bank of Amsterdam, which lowered the cost of capital for these ventures. In reality, the two were inseparable. Your financial system allowed you to fund, build, and insure vast fleets of these efficient ships at an unprecedentedly low cost, creating a feedback loop of ever-increasing commercial power. You are cornering the market, one cheap shipment at a time. The profits are astronomical, but the effect on your rivals is devastating. Local shipping industries in other countries begin to wither. Why would a monarch or a merchant guild invest in building a fleet of expensive, inefficient ships when the Dutch are willing to do all the work for them, for a fraction of the cost? You are not just winning the game. You are changing the rules to ensure that only you can play effectively. You have woven a web of economic dependency that crisscrosses the continent, with you and your ugly little ships sitting right in the center. Europe is now your captive market, but your ambition, fueled by this incredible success, is beginning to look beyond the familiar coastlines of France, Spain, and England towards the distant, fabled markets of the East. The European carrying trade has made you wealthy, but it has also made you ambitious. You and your fellow merchants now look at the maps in your counting houses, and your eyes are drawn to the tantalizing, perilous routes that lead around Africa to the Indies. For a century, the Portuguese have maintained a chokehold on the incredibly lucrative spice trade, using their bulky, expensive carracks to haul cloves, nutmeg, and pepper back to Lisbon, selling them for astronomical prices. You and your countrymen have been dipping your toes in these waters, sending out small competing fleets, but the results are chaotic. Your own ships end up bidding against each other in Asian ports, driving prices up, only to flood the market back in Amsterdam, causing prices to crash. It's capitalism at its most self-destructive. The Dutch government, the States General, sees this inefficiency and decides to intervene. In 1602, in an act of unprecedented state-sponsored consolidation, all the competing little companies are forced to merge. You, as a stakeholder in one of these early ventures, reluctantly trade in your shares for a stake in a new, colossal entity, the Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie, the United East India Company, or VOC. This is not just another company. The VOC is something the world has never seen before. It is arguably the first true multinational corporation, and it is the first to be financed by issuing shares of stock that can be freely bought and sold by the public on the newly established Amsterdam Stock Exchange. But its true power lies in its charter. The quirky and terrifying fact is that the Dutch government has granted the VOC quasi-governmental powers. Your company has the right to build forts, maintain its own armies and navies, negotiate treaties with local rulers, and even declare war. The VOC's charter basically said it could do anything in the interest of trade, which its directors interpreted very broadly, to include things like bombarding a rival's port and politely deposing a local sultan. It's as if a modern corporation like Apple or Amazon were given its own military and diplomatic corps. Historians still argue whether the VOC should be seen as a pioneering capitalist enterprise that laid the groundwork for modern global trade, or as a ruthless state-sanctioned monopoly that operated more like a proto-imperialist government than a private company. As a shareholder, you don't spend much time on the philosophical debate. You are simply amazed at the power and potential of this new organization. So where does your humble, ugly Fluyt fit into this globe-spanning machine of commerce and conquest? The VOC's main trunk route, the long, dangerous 6-month voyage from the Netherlands to its new Asian headquarters in Batavia, modern-day Jakarta, is often sailed by specially built, heavily armed vessels known as East Indiamen. These are a compromise, a hybrid design that incorporates the Fluyt's cargo capacity, but adds back the cannons and thick oak hulls needed to fight off the Portuguese and the English. But the true genius of the VOC, and the Fluyt's essential role, is in the intra-Asian trade. The company quickly realizes that the real money is not just in bringing spices back to Europe, but in dominating all the trade routes within Asia itself. And for this, the Fluyt is the perfect tool. While the big, fancy East Indiamen were the movie stars sailing the red carpet between Amsterdam and Batavia, the Fluyts were the unglamorous but essential roadies, hauling all the equipment around behind the scenes. Fleets of your Fluyts, dispatched from your shipyards back home, become the logistical backbone of the VOC's Asian empire. They are the workhorses, the delivery trucks, the vital connectors in a sprawling network. A Fluyt might spend years in Asia without ever returning to Europe. It will haul timber from Siam to the shipyards of Batavia to repair the larger warships. It will transport cheap Indian textiles to the Spice Islands, where they are more valuable than gold for trading with the local populations for nutmeg and mace. It will carry rice from Java to feed the soldiers and administrators in the Dutch forts in Ceylon and Formosa. The very same principles that made the ship a winner in the Baltic, specialization, massive cargo capacity, and a tiny crew, make it the ultimate logistical weapon in the VOC's arsenal. It allows the company to move bulk goods and supplies around Asia at a cost its rivals simply cannot match. The profit from a single cargo of cloves is immense, but that profit is only possible because of the cheap, efficient network of Fluyts that keeps the entire enterprise supplied and running. The ship designed to beat a Danish tax collector has now become the indispensable tool for building a corporate empire on the other side of the world. You are a long way from the cold, gray waters of the Baltic. Your Fluyt is anchored in the sprawling, sweltering port of Batavia, the VOC's newly established headquarters on the island of Java. The air here is different. It's not the clean, sharp scent of salt and pine you are used to, but a thick, humid cocktail of alien blossoms, charcoal smoke, tropical rain, and something else. Something intoxicating that hangs over the entire waterfront. The smell of spices. Your job today is to supervise the loading of cargo that has been brought here from other, even more distant trading posts by smaller vessels. This is a world away from stacking rough-hewn timbers or shoveling grain. The dock workers move with a careful reverence, and for good reason. You're overseeing the loading of the ship, and you're more nervous than you were hauling timber. If you drop a log in the water, you lose a few guilders. If you drop a sack of nutmeg, you've just lost the equivalent of a small farm. They are bringing on the cloves, dried, unopened flower buds from the Molucca Islands, the fabled Spice Islands. Their pungent, almost medicinal aroma cuts through the thick air. This is the scent of the VOC's primary obsession, the commodity for which it will wage brutal wars to secure a total monopoly. Then come the baskets of nutmeg and mace, both from the same fruit grown only on the tiny Banda Islands. The nutmegs are hard, brown, and unassuming, like wooden eggs, but you know that grated into a dish or a drink, they impart a warm, sweet, and irresistible flavor. Wrapped around them in the fruit is their even more precious cousin, mace, a delicate blood-red webbing that is carefully peeled away and dried. It's not just spices. Your hold, designed for the monotonous bulk of Baltic rye, is now being filled with the treasures of a continent. There are heavy, lead-lined chests of tea from China, its subtle fragrance a promise of the calming ritual it will introduce to Europe. There are bales of shimmering silk, brought by junk from Persia and the Orient, folded so tightly that their intricate patterns are a hidden secret. There are crates of delicate blue and white porcelain, packed carefully in rice straw, each piece a fragile work of art that will soon grace the mantelpiece of a wealthy Amsterdammer. This is the stuff of dreams. Back home, these goods are more than just luxuries. They represent a fundamental shift in taste and society. This is a quirky but important detail of your time. Spices are not just about flavor. In a world before refrigeration, meat was often salted, dried, or simply old. A generous use of pungent cloves or nutmeg could mask the taste of incipient spoilage, making a questionable meal palatable. The scent of spices in a household was therefore a sign of two things: immense wealth to afford the spices, and the even greater wealth of having fresh meat that didn't require them. The sheer volume of these goods transported by your fleets will fundamentally alter the European palate. Before this, high-end European cooking was mostly just put some salt on it. After this, it will become a competitive sport to see how many continents you could taste in a single bite. Historians and culinary experts still argue whether the flood of new spices into Europe created new tastes, or if it simply satisfied a pre-existing and intense demand for the exotic flavors that had trickled in via the old Silk Road for centuries. What is certain is that your ships are turning a scarce luxury for kings into a staple for the burgeoning merchant class. Your Fluyt, this specific one you stand on, might be tasked with the next leg of the intra-Asian journey, perhaps taking this cargo to a VOC outpost in India to trade for cotton textiles. Or it might be loading up with sugar from the company's plantations in Formosa. You are a cog in the vast, complex machine that gathers the riches of the East and funnels them here to Batavia, where the large armed East Indiamen are waiting to begin the long, perilous voyage home. The last of the crates is lowered into the belly of your ship. The hatches are closed, sealing the fragrant treasures in the darkness of the hold. You look at your vessel, a design born from the cold, pragmatic need to haul cheap bulk goods more efficiently. It is now a treasure chest, and as it moves across the oceans, it isn't just carrying cargo. It is carrying culture, taste, and desire, knitting the far corners of the world together with threads of commerce and changing forever what it means to live and to eat in Europe. Your ship, the humble Fluyt, is not just a treasure chest. As you spend more time navigating the vast trade network of the VOC and its Atlantic counterpart, the West India Company, you realize it's something more. It is the very sinew and bone of a new kind of global empire. You are no longer just a merchant. You are a traveler across a sprawling, interconnected system, and the Fluyt is your window onto its workings. Your voyage takes you out of the spice-scented waters of the East Indies and into the vast, empty expanse of the Indian Ocean. The journey is brutally long, a seemingly endless cycle of sun and squall. After months when the water barrels are low and the crew's gums are beginning to feel tender with the first signs of scurvy, you make landfall. You have arrived at the Cape of Good Hope, the southern tip of Africa. Here the VOC has established a new settlement, but this isn't a colony in the traditional sense. The quirky truth is that the Cape Colony wasn't founded for conquest or for mining gold. It was established for the profoundly practical purpose of being a refreshment station. It is the world's most remote and heavily fortified vegetable garden. You watch as your crew and others from the fleet go ashore, reveling in the fresh water and the feel of solid ground. Your ship unloads supplies for the settlers, tools, seeds, cloth, and wine from Europe, all transported efficiently by other Fluyts. In return, you load up on fresh produce, cabbages, carrots, and livestock that will keep the crews healthy for the final leg of the voyage. The Fluyt, with its ability to cheaply transport the bulk supplies needed to maintain this outpost, makes this vital logistical hub possible. It is a floating supply truck, ensuring the corporate employees halfway across the world don't starve. Your journey continues, this time across the Atlantic. You arrive in a harbor that feels both strange and familiar. A wide river mouth, a wooded island, and a bustling, chaotic settlement at its southern tip. This is New Amsterdam. Here, on Manhattan Island, the Fluyts are at work again. You watch one being unloaded at the dock, its hold filled not with spices, but with yellow Dutch bricks to build the colonists' houses, roof tiles, and iron tools. Once empty, it will be filled again with the products of this new continent. Vast stacks of beaver pelts, destined for the hats of fashionable Europeans, and timber from the endless forests to supply the shipyards back home. The Fluyt is the ultimate multi-tool. In the Baltic, it's a grain truck. In Asia, it's a delivery van for spices. And in the Atlantic, it's the moving van for a new colony. As you travel from the trading posts of Asia to the supply station in Africa and the colonial outpost in America, you begin to understand the unique nature of the empire your nation is building. It is not like the Spanish Empire, built on vast territorial conquest and the extraction of silver. It is a web of strategic points, a network of harbors, forts, and factories, all chosen for their commercial value. Historians still argue whether the Dutch Empire was a true colonial empire in the same vein as the Spanish or British, who focused on large-scale settlement and territorial control, or if it was primarily a commercial enterprise that established colonies only when absolutely necessary to protect its trade routes and monopolies. From your vantage point, it feels like the latter. It is an empire of logistics, and the Fluyt is the key to it all. It is the connective tissue. You see it everywhere. A Fluyt delivering soldiers and cannons to a fort in Ceylon, another carrying enslaved people from West Africa to the sugar plantations of Dutch Brazil, a third carrying pay chests and official correspondence from the company directors in Amsterdam to their governor in Batavia. Without this cheap, efficient, reliable method of moving bulk goods, people, and information across immense distances, the entire system would collapse under its own weight. It would be financially impossible to supply and connect these far-flung outposts. You stand on the muddy shore of the East River, looking at the familiar, ugly, pear-shaped hull of a Fluyt bobbing in the tide. You saw this same ship design in the icy harbors of the Baltic and the humid ports of the Indies. It is the unifying element, the logistical thread that ties this fragile, violent, and immensely profitable global enterprise together. It is the physical manifestation of an empire built not for the glory of a king, but for the enrichment of its shareholders. The question that now comes to your mind is a simple one. What is it actually like for the dozen or so poor souls crammed inside this floating spreadsheet for months on end? You stand on the docks no longer as a wealthy merchant or an investor, but as a man who needs a job. You sign the ship's articles, committing yourself to a long voyage in exchange for a meager wage and a share of the unimaginable discomforts to come. The grand strategic view of the global supply chain you once admired vanishes the moment you haul your sea chest aboard. You are now inside the machine, and you are about to discover the true human cost of all that efficiency. Your new home is the forecastle, the cramped, triangular space in the bow of the ship, right below the main deck. You swing your hammock in the designated spot, and the full reality of your situation sinks in. The word cramped is insufficient. Your living quarters have all the spacious charm of a broom closet that's been converted into a dorm room for 10 people. The architect's primary design goal seems to have been maximum human compression. Hammocks are strung hook to hook, so close that you will spend your nights listening to the snores, coughs, and feverish muttering of your shipmates in what feels like surround sound. There is no privacy. This dark, damp, wedge-shaped room is where you sleep, eat, and spend every moment you are not on deck working. There are no portholes, so the only light is the swinging gloom of a single lantern. This is a direct consequence of the Fluyt's design. The vast, uninterrupted cargo hold that makes the ship so profitable takes up all the prime real estate. The crew, the least valuable commodity on board, is crammed into the leftover, least desirable space. The motion here, at the very front of the ship, is violent. You don't ride the waves, you are thrown by them. The ship rises on a swell, hangs for a moment, and then slams down with a shuddering crash that you feel in your teeth. When it pitches, you are either climbing a steep hill or sliding into a dark pit. And then there is the sound. A constant, deafening symphony of groaning timbers, the shriek of the wind in the rigging above, and the ceaseless roar of water against the hull just inches from your head. But the worst part, the part that will saturate every moment of your life for the next 6 months, is the smell. It is a physical presence in the air, a complex and overpowering assault on the senses. If they could have bottled the smell from the forecastle of a Fluyt, it would be the ultimate gag gift, a scent that would make a skunk apologize. It is a layered aroma. At the base is the pervasive, musty stench of damp wood and mildew. On top of that is the sour, ripe odor of a dozen unwashed men, living and sweating in close confinement. Wafting up from below is the foul, stagnant breath of the bilge water, a putrid soup of leakage and refuse. And cutting through it all is the sharp, ammoniac tang from the heads, the ship's toilet, which is little more than a grate at the bow, directly forward of your living space. Your entire life is contained in a single, small sea chest wedged between the bunks. Historians and archaeologists still argue based on the scarce evidence from shipwrecks just how many personal possessions an ordinary sailor would have owned. But the consensus is that it was likely little more than a spare shirt, a knife, and perhaps a wooden spoon. There is no room for sentiment or luxury. Privacy is a concept as foreign here as a balanced diet. You get to know your crewmates on a level that modern HR departments would have several very serious meetings about. Lying in your hammock, wedged between the damp hull and the man in the next hammock, you understand the dark side of the Fluyt's genius. The skeleton crew, which looks so good on the ledger, means that everyone is perpetually overworked. The watches are long, the work is back-breaking, and there are never enough hands. The ship was designed by accountants, and you are living in the fine print of their calculations. You are not a person, you are a line item under labor costs, to be minimized like any other expense. You are the cheap, replaceable software running on this ruthlessly optimized hardware. And as the ship slams into another wave, sending a spray of cold seawater through a crack in the deck boards above, your stomach rumbles, and your thoughts turn to the one thing that will sustain you through the misery: the food. Lying in the damp darkness of the forecastle, your thoughts of hunger are soon answered by a shout from the deck. It's the call to mess. You and your shipmates untangle yourselves from your hammocks and lurch your way to the slightly more open space in the ship's waist where the cook is serving the day's main meal. Your hopes are not high. You know the menu by heart, because it is the same menu every day, a monotonous litany dictated by the brutal realities of preservation at sea. Your food is served not on a plate, but in a small wooden bowl. It is a trinity of non-perishables: The first and most foundational element is the ship's biscuit, also known as hardtack. These are not the fluffy, warm biscuits of a home kitchen. These are slabs of flour, water, and salt, baked twice until they are as hard and dense as a piece of wood. They are also known, quite accurately, as molar breakers, and you could probably use one to patch a small leak in the hull. The main ingredient seems to be compressed flour and sheer stubbornness. The second part of your meal is the meat. The ship's cook, a grizzled man with a perpetually grim expression, uses a large hook to haul a chunk of dark, stringy beef from a barrel of brine. This meat has been pickling for months, saturated with so much salt that it is practically mummified. It is boiled to something resembling edibility, but it remains incredibly tough and so salty it makes your eyes water. This is served alongside a ladleful of peas porridge, a thick gray-green gruel of boiled dried peas that serves as the primary ballast for the meal. And to wash it all down, you are given a ration of weak, watery beer. The beer is not a luxury, it's a necessity. The water stored in the casks below deck quickly becomes slimy and stagnant, a breeding ground for disease. The beer, thanks to the alcohol, is much safer to drink and provides a vital source of calories for the hard labor you must perform. This is the ultimate low-carb, high-sodium, zero-freshness diet. It wouldn't just be rejected by modern nutritionists. It would cause them to weep openly. You take your ration and sit on a coil of rope to eat. You pick up your hardtack and out of habit you tap it firmly on the deck. A few small black insects, weevils, fall out. This is a quirky but universal reality of your diet. The casks of biscuit are an ideal breeding ground for these creatures. The old sailor's joke is that it's better to eat the weevils than the maggots that sometimes follow, because they're the lesser of two weevils. You tell yourself this as you break off a piece and dunk it into your beer, letting it soak for a minute to soften it just enough so that you don't break a tooth. For the first few weeks of a voyage, this diet is merely monotonous. But as the months drag on, it becomes a slow-acting poison. Your body, deprived of essential nutrients found in fresh fruits and vegetables, begins to break down. This is the terrifying specter of scurvy. It starts with a deep, aching lethargy. Then your gums begin to swell and bleed. Old scars, long since healed, can strangely reopen. Your teeth loosen in their sockets. Historians still debate how much was truly understood about scurvy during the 17th century. While some forward-thinking captains and doctors made the connection to fresh produce, a widespread systematic understanding of vitamin C deficiency was still more than a century away. This is why a stop at a place like the Cape Colony, which you saw in the last section, wasn't just a convenience, it was a life-saving necessity. You chew your tough, salty meat and your buggy, softened biscuit. This food is not for pleasure. It is fuel, and poor fuel at that. Each meal is a stark reminder of your complete and utter isolation from the land and all its fresh bounty. Your own body has become a ticking clock, and with every identical, nutrient-poor meal you consume, you can feel the sand running out. Surviving this existence is a matter of endurance. A battle waged not just against the sea and the storms, but against the very food that is supposed to keep you alive. After a meal that reminds you only of your distance from land, you climb back on deck. The ship is a tiny, self-contained world, a speck of wood and canvas surrounded by a featureless, blue infinity. Wiping the salt spray from your eyes, you watch the officers and you wonder about the fundamental mystery of your existence. How in the world does anyone know where you are and where you're going? You learn that navigation is the art of answering two vital questions. First, how far north or south of the equator are you? That's your latitude. Second, how far east or west are you from your home port? That's your longitude. One of these questions is a difficult but solvable puzzle. The other is a nightmare of guesswork. You watch the ship's navigator, the most learned man on board, as he prepares for his most important ritual of the day. As the sun climbs towards its zenith, he retrieves his tools. They are not the sleek brass and glass instruments of a later age, but beautifully crafted implements of wood and bone. He might use a cross-staff, a simple but effective tool, or the more advanced backstaff, which has the distinct advantage that it allows him to measure the sun's height without staring directly into its blinding glare. At the precise moment of noon, when the sun hangs at its highest point, He squints, aligns the instrument with the horizon and the sun, and calls out a series of angles. By consulting a book of charts and tables, an almanac that is the ship's most valuable text, he can translate that angle into your latitude. At night in the northern hemisphere, he can perform a similar, more comfortable trick with the North Star. This is the moment of science on the ship, a brief and reassuring pinprick of certainty in a vast ocean of doubt. But knowing your latitude is only half the battle. To have any idea of your longitude, you first need to know how fast you are going. For this, another ritual is performed every hour. A sailor appears with a curious device, a small, weighted triangle of wood, the chip tied to a long rope coiled on a reel. The rope has knots tied in it at precise regular intervals. Another sailor stands ready with a 28-second sand glass. On the officer's command, the chip is tossed overboard, and as the first knot passes the rail, the sand glass is flipped. The line spools out rapidly and the sailor counts the knots as they slip through his fingers. When the sand runs out, the line is stopped. The number of knots that ran out in that short time is your ship's speed in knots, a term mariners still use today. It's a wonderfully clever and tactile way of measuring speed. Now comes the hard part. You have your direction from the magnetic compass, your speed from the chip log, and your latitude from the sun. But there is no reliable way to measure your longitude. That puzzle won't be solved for another century. So you must rely on the terrifyingly imprecise art of dead reckoning. The navigator goes to his chart, a precious sheet of parchment showing the coastlines of the known world. He finds your last known position, places his ruler, and draws a tiny pencil line. We traveled at 5 knots, he might say, on a southwesterly course for 4 hours. Accounting for the wind, we should be about here. It is at best an educated guess. Trying to find your longitude by dead reckoning is the 17th century equivalent of navigating a cross-country road trip using only a broken speedometer and a vague memory of your last turn. Every calculation is an approximation plagued by invisible forces. A silent ocean current could be pushing you miles off course. The compass itself might be lying, tricked by the Earth's magnetic variation. The man at the helm might have steered an unsteady course. Each of these tiny errors accumulates day after day, until your pencil mark on the chart could be 100 miles or more from your actual location in the real world. You are sailing in a bubble of uncertainty that grows larger with every passing hour. You use the best charts you can get, but historians and scientists still debate the accuracy and sources of the Portolan charts used during this period, with some maps showing surprisingly accurate coastlines, for which the method of survey is completely unknown. You watch the navigator make his little mark, the fate of all 30 souls aboard resting on his geometry and intuition. Your entire existence is balanced on the knife edge of his calculations. One mistake, one unseen current, one careless measurement could be the difference between making landfall and sailing into oblivion. It is a constant, silent struggle against the forces of chaos, and you know that out here, the chaos often wins. You are on watch in the dead of night, staring out at the familiar patterns of the stars. But tonight something is different. The air grows heavy and thick. The wind dies to an unnerving calm, and the sea, instead of its usual rhythmic swell, begins to move in a confused, choppy pattern. An older sailor beside you squints at the horizon and mutters that he doesn't like the look of the sky. He is a man who has spent his life reading the ocean's moods, and you trust his unease more than any navigator's chart. Within an hour, the world changes. The sky, which was clear moments before, is now covered by a bruised black ceiling of clouds that swallows the stars. The wind returns not as a breeze but as a physical blow, a low guttural howl that shrieks through the rigging. The captain is on deck, his voice barely audible over the rising gale, shouting orders. All hands, strike the topsails, furl the mainsail. What follows is a frantic, desperate race against the elements. You and the rest of the tiny crew scramble up the swaying ratlines, your hands and feet finding their familiar holds in the darkness. This is the part of the sea voyage that they conveniently leave out of the recruitment posters. The wind whips at you, trying to tear you from your perch. The ship begins to pitch and roll violently beneath you. Your task is to subdue the massive canvases of the sails, to bind them tightly to the yards before the wind can shred them to ribbons, or, worse, use their power to capsize the ship entirely. Then the rain begins, a cold, horizontal torrent that feels like being pelted with gravel. The storm is now upon you in its full fury. The world becomes a churning chaos of wind and water. Waves, which were once rolling hills, have become jagged, moving mountains of black water, their crests glowing with an eerie phosphorescence. They crash over the bow, sending a river of freezing seawater washing down the length of the deck, threatening to sweep you overboard. You cling to the ropes, your knuckles white, your body soaked and shivering. In this maelstrom, you become intimately aware of the Fluyt's unique character and its vulnerabilities. Its wide, rounded hull, so brilliant for maximizing cargo, interacts with the waves in a terrifying way. When a large wave strikes the ship on its side, a beam sea, the vessel rolls with a sickening, pendulum-like violence. The ship is rolling so violently it feels less like a boat and more like a theme park ride designed by someone with a deep-seated grudge against the human inner ear. Naval architects and historians still debate the exact seaworthiness of the Fluyt in extreme conditions, particularly whether its rounded hull made it more prone to rolling excessively compared to sharper-hulled vessels. Right now, you are not debating. You are just praying the next roll isn't the one that sends the masts dipping into the sea. Those tall, slender masts, designed for their efficient sail plan, are now under unimaginable strain. With every lurch of the ship, they flex and groan, the sound like a giant's bones breaking. The constant, nagging fear is that one will snap, bringing the entire web of rigging, spars, and sails crashing down on the deck. Amidst the terror, you see something strange. At the very tip of the mainmast, a ghostly blue-green flame begins to dance and flicker. It is St. Elmo's fire, a discharge of static electricity common in thunderstorms at sea. The old sailor beside you, his face a mask of exhaustion, sees it and makes a quick sign of the cross. To him, it is not a scientific phenomenon but a sacred omen, a sign that the patron saint of sailors is watching over your vessel. For a moment, its ethereal light is a point of strange beauty in the heart of the nightmare. The hours blur into a single, sustained struggle for survival. Below deck, the situation is just as dire. The immense pressure of the sea is forcing water through every tiny crack in the hull. A team of men is fixed at the pumps, their bodies moving in a monotonous, back-breaking rhythm, the only thing keeping the rising bilge water from swamping the hold. Then, as gradually as it began, the storm passes. The wind lessens its scream to a manageable roar. The waves shrink from mountains back to hills, and a sliver of gray dawn appears on the horizon. The ship has survived. You and your shipmates, bruised, battered, and utterly exhausted, take stock of the damage. A sail is torn, a spare spar has been washed overboard, but the hull is intact. You have faced down one of the greatest dangers of the sea and won. And you have learned a vital lesson about your cheap, ugly ship. For all its economic genius, it is a specialized tool. In the face of nature's raw power, its clever design features become potential flaws, and its survival rests entirely on the skill and sheer endurance of its small, weary crew. In the exhausted calm that follows the storm, as you work to patch a shredded sail and resecure the lashings on deck, you look at your ship with a new understanding. It is a vessel, a container. It holds its crew, its cargo, and its own quiet history of survival. But as you look around at your shipmates, a motley collection of Dutchmen, Danes, and Germans, and think about the exotic goods sealed in the hold below, you realize your ship is also a vector. It doesn't just travel across the world, it actively changes it. It is a capsule of one continent, sent to collide with another. And the results of that collision are far more profound than any entry in a merchant's ledger. Your Fluyt, and the thousands like it, are carrying a hidden, invisible cargo. First, it carries ideas. In the captain's cabin are letters of instruction from the VOC directors, commercial news from the stock exchange, and political pamphlets from the printing presses of Amsterdam. The ship's hold is basically the 17th century's version of a hard drive, packed with data in the form of books, maps, and letters. It just had a much slower transfer rate and a higher chance of being attacked by pirates. The ship connects minds as well as markets. When it arrives in a distant colony, it brings not just supplies, but news, orders, and the intellectual currents of Europe. It carries culture. The sailors themselves, with their languages, songs, and superstitions, are agents of cultural mixing. But the ship also carries missionaries with their Bibles, administrators with their law books, and colonists with their customs. You're not just delivering textiles, you're delivering a whole new set of religious ideas and social customs, a sort of unsolicited free trial of European culture that comes with every shipment. Historians and sociologists still debate the extent to which the cultural exchange of this era was a true exchange versus a one-sided imposition of European norms and values on the rest of the world. Standing on this deck, a tiny floating piece of the Netherlands, it is clear that you are part of a system that has a very strong point of view. Then there is the darkest part of this invisible cargo: disease. You and your crewmates are the survivors of the crowded, unsanitary, and disease-ridden cities of Europe. You carry antibodies and immunities as part of your very being, but you also carry the dormant pathogens. When your ship makes landfall in a place where the local population has been isolated for millennia, you unleash a biological apocalypse. A simple cough from a sailor can introduce a virus like measles or smallpox into a community with no natural defense. The Fluyt, because it makes these long-distance voyages more common and more reliable, becomes a terrifyingly efficient vector for epidemics that will depopulate entire regions. And the biological exchange goes both ways. The ship has its official declared cargo, and then it has its unofficial cargo of rats, weevils, and microbes, all traveling without a ticket and arguably having a much bigger long-term impact on the destination. Your ship also becomes a floating botanical garden, a Noah's Ark that is busy rearranging the planet's ecosystem. You carry coffee plants from Arabia to be planted in Java. You transport sugarcane from Asia to the Caribbean, and on the return voyage, you bring New World crops like maize, potatoes, and tobacco back to be introduced to Africa and Asia. The Fluyt is a key instrument in this vast, unplanned experiment in global agriculture, the consequences of which we are still living with today. The Columbian exchange has been happening for over a century, but the sheer number of your ships, the intensity of the traffic you are creating, amplifies this process exponentially. You are turning what was a trickle of exchange into a flood. Your ship, designed for the simple, profitable task of moving goods, is inadvertently a catalyst for the greatest biological and cultural upheaval in human history. It is shrinking the world for better and for worse, tangling disparate ecosystems and societies together into a single, interconnected and fragile global web. The power of its design is so potent that this simple blueprint, this idea of a specialized, efficient carrier, inevitably begins to evolve. You look upon your ship, this agent of global change, and you realize its design is not a final, perfect form but an idea. And like any powerful idea, it is destined to be copied, adapted, and mutated to fit new purposes. The principle of a specialized, efficient cargo carrier is too potent to be confined to a single role. The success in the Baltic and Asian trades creates new Dutch industries, and these new industries demand new, specialized tools. Your next voyage is not to a bustling port, but to the edge of the world. You are going north, into the ice. The ship you are on is instantly recognizable as a Fluyt. It has the same round, pot-bellied hull and the narrow upper deck. But it has been changed. It feels heavier, more robust. The hull around the waterline has been reinforced with a second layer of thick planking, an ice skin, designed to withstand the inevitable grinding collisions with the floating ice packs of the Arctic. On deck, new and strange equipment has been installed. Long, heavy whaleboats hang from thick wooden davits, ready to be lowered at a moment's notice. And amidships, there is a structure that seems utterly insane on a wooden vessel. A large brick furnace, open to the sky, known as a tryworks. Having a giant brick furnace full of boiling whale fat on the deck of a wooden ship seems like a terrible idea. And yet, here we are. It's the 17th century's most ambitious and flammable barbecue. You are on a whaling Fluyt, and your cargo is not something you buy but something you hunt. In the frigid waters around Svalbard, your ship becomes a floating factory. The whaleboats are launched to pursue the great bowhead whales, a dangerous and brutal business. Once a whale is killed, it is towed back to the ship, and the crew works to strip its thick blanket of blubber. The blubber is then rendered down in the tryworks, boiled into precious whale oil that will fuel the lamps of Europe. The Fluyt's enormous hold, once ideal for grain, is now perfect for the hundreds of barrels of oil that make this perilous voyage profitable. Your ship is the logistical key to Dutch dominance of the 17th century whaling industry, centered on the infamous seasonal settlement of Smeerenburg, literally Blubber Town. Then your travels take you to an entirely different hostile environment, the Caribbean. Here the threat is not ice, but pirates, privateers, and the navies of rival empires. The standard unarmed Fluyt is a floating victim in these waters. And so, the design is adapted again. You find yourself on a West Indiamen, a ship built for the trade in sugar and tobacco. Historians still debate the extent to which the Dutch West India Company's ships were distinct designs or simply standard Fluyts that were more heavily armed to cope with the higher prevalence of privateers and pirates in the Caribbean. From your position on deck, it certainly feels like the latter. It's a Fluyt that's been forced to go to the gym and learn how to fight. The familiar pear-shaped hull is there, but the open, uncluttered deck is gone. A row of heavy cannons now sits in newly cut gun ports. The crew is twice the size of a Baltic trader's, with professional gunners and a contingent of soldiers. It is a step backward in efficiency, a compromise that sacrifices cargo space and increases operating cost in the name of survival. The original Fluyt was a radical statement of peaceful, profitable commerce. This version is a pragmatic admission that in some parts of the world, profit is impossible without gunpowder. You've now seen the incredible adaptability of this one core concept. The original Fluyt was the base model sedan, designed for reliability and economy. The Arctic whaler is the rugged, all-wheel drive winter package, reinforced and equipped for a harsh industrial task. The West Indiamen is the model with the optional and very necessary anti-theft security system. The genius of the initial design was not its rigidity but its flexibility. It was a platform for innovation, but this very success, this ability to dominate every trade route from the Arctic to the Caribbean by building the perfect, most cost-effective tool for the job, was an act of economic aggression, and your rivals were not going to let it go unanswered. Your success has become a problem. For decades, your nation's commercial dominance has been growing unchecked, and your fleets of Fluyts are the most visible symbol of this power. They are in every port, on every sea lane, the ubiquitous agents of Dutch prosperity. And the other nations of Europe, particularly the English, have been watching with a growing sense of envy, resentment, and alarm. An island nation with its own proud maritime tradition is not going to stand by while its Dutch rivals become the sole masters of the sea. The response, when it comes, is a direct assault on the very foundation of your business model. The first shot in this new conflict is not fired from a cannon, it's written on parchment. In 1651, the English Parliament passes the Navigation Act. It is a devastatingly simple and targeted piece of economic legislation. It declares that any goods imported into England or its colonies must be carried in English ships, or in ships from the country where the goods actually originated. In a single stroke of a pen, your entire business as the freight hauler of Europe is declared illegal in English ports. The French wine you were planning to ship to London, the Russian caviar destined for Bristol, those routes are now closed to you. The English Navigation Act was the 17th century equivalent of a country suddenly declaring that all international packages have to be delivered by its own postal service, even if it's slower and more expensive. It was a brilliantly unsubtle way of saying, your business model is too successful, so we're making it illegal. The political tension skyrockets. The English Channel, your main highway for trade, becomes a flashpoint. You are a sailor on a Fluyt, part of a large convoy heading home, escorted by a handful of Dutch warships. An English fleet appears on the horizon. They are not pirates, they are professional, disciplined, and spoiling for a fight. They send a signal, demanding that your admiral dip his flag and salute, a quirky but deadly serious point of naval etiquette. The English claim sovereignty over these seas and demand this gesture of respect. Your admiral, representing a proud and sovereign republic that considers itself England's equal, refuses. The whole flag saluting business was basically an international game of chicken, played with hundreds of cannons. It was less about politeness and more about establishing who was the alpha navy on the block. The refusal is the spark. A cannon fires, and suddenly, the sea erupts in violence. You are now in the middle of a full-scale naval battle, and it is a terrifying new reality. Your Fluyt is not a combatant, it is a liability. It is the prize. Suddenly, being the driver of the world's most efficient and profitable delivery van is a lot less fun when another, much bigger truck with cannons welded to the side is trying to run you off the road. The air fills with the deafening thunder of cannon broadsides, a continuous rolling concussion that you feel deep in your chest. The smoke from the gunpowder is thick and acrid, obscuring the sky and turning the battle into a confusing, hellish lottery. You see cannonballs skipping across the water, and you see them strike a nearby warship, sending up a geyser of splinters the size of a man. Your unarmed, slow-to-maneuver ship is a sitting duck. All you can do is follow the signals from your escort, trying to stay behind the line of battle, praying that your warships can hold off the English attacks. The very principles that made your ship a commercial success, its light construction, its lack of cannons, its small crew, now mark it as desperately vulnerable. Historians still debate whether the Anglo-Dutch wars were primarily economic conflicts driven by commercial rivalry, or if they were fueled more by political and ideological differences between England's new republic and the Dutch Republic. Huddled on the deck of your merchant ship, watching two of the world's most powerful navies tear each other apart over your convoy, the distinction feels meaningless. The battle rages for hours and ends, like many of these encounters, in a bloody stalemate as dusk falls. Your convoy, battered but mostly intact, uses the darkness to slip away. You have survived, but the game has irrevocably changed. The peaceful, if perilous, era of commercial expansion is over. The success of your cheap, ugly ship has directly led to a series of massive, existential wars against a determined and powerful rival. The age of the accountant is giving way to the age of the admiral, and in this new, brutal arena, the limitations of a design based purely on economics are about to become dangerously clear. You are back in a Dutch port watching the shipwrights at work. The familiar sounds of hammering and sawing fill the air, but the work has changed. Alongside the new Fluyts being laid down for the merchant companies, there are much larger, more menacing skeletons of ships taking shape. These are warships built for the Admiralty. After the shock of the first naval battles against the English, the reality of this new era of warfare has set in, and your nation is in a frantic arms race. You look at your Fluyt, moored nearby, and for the first time, you see it not as a revolutionary tool, but as a liability. It is a masterpiece, but a masterpiece for a world that is rapidly vanishing. On the open seas, a new kind of warfare is being perfected, and your ship has no place in it. This is the age of the line of battle. The chaotic melees of the past are being replaced by a brutal, organized discipline. Fleets now form themselves into long, single-file lines, sailing past each other to deliver coordinated, overwhelming broadsides. It is naval warfare as a form of industrial-scale destruction, and it requires a very specific and very expensive kind of tool, the ship of the line. And your Fluyt is not that tool. Asking a Fluyt to fight in a line of battle is like asking a minivan to compete in a Formula One race. It's going to end badly, with a lot of splintered wood and confused looks. Every feature that makes it an economic marvel is a fatal military flaw. Its light construction, using plentiful pine instead of battle-hardened oak, means it can't withstand a pounding from heavy cannon. A broadside that would merely anger a true warship would shatter your Fluyt's hull. Its famous pear-shaped belly and rounded bottom make it a poor gun platform, rolling wildly in the swell and making it impossible to aim its few guns accurately. And the deck, that narrow, tax-evading triumph of design, it's a tactical nightmare. There is simply no room to operate the batteries of heavy cannons that are the main currency of a naval battle. Worst of all is the skeleton crew. To effectively fight a ship of the line requires hundreds of men, teams to load and fire the cannons, sailors to manage the sails under fire, marines to repel boarders, and powder monkeys to run gunpowder from the magazine. Your crew of 12 can do none of these things. You are hopelessly, tragically outgunned and outmanned. This creates a terrible dilemma for your nation. The Dutch Republic is a commercial enterprise at its heart. Do you invest your finite resources in building thousands of profitable Fluyts to keep the economy running, or in a fleet of hugely expensive, unprofitable warships to defend them? Naval historians still debate whether the Dutch Republic's continued reliance on armed merchantmen as a significant part of their battle fleet was a strategic error or a necessary pragmatic choice for a nation that always prioritized its commercial fleet over a large standing professional navy. The strain of these new wars is felt everywhere. The demand for sailors has skyrocketed. One evening, you are in a dockside tavern trying to forget the horrors of the last battle when a group of naval officers enters, flanked by armed men. They are a press gang. In a quirky and terrifying twist of fate, the very efficiency that put you out of a job on an overmanned warship now makes you a target. Because the merchant fleet needs so few sailors per ship, there is a large pool of experienced mariners like you that the Navy can forcibly conscript. It's a tough career choice. You can either sign on to a merchant ship and risk getting attacked by the enemy, or you can go to a tavern and risk getting aggressively hired by your own side. You look from the mighty oak-ribbed warship under construction to the familiar, pine-built Fluyt waiting for its cargo. They represent two different philosophies, two different worlds. One is a tool of pure commerce, the other a tool of pure violence. The tragedy is that the success of the first has made the second an absolute necessity. The Fluyt created a world that it could no longer survive in. Its specialization was its genius, but in an age of total war it is also its doom. The years pass. The great wars with the English have come and gone, leaving a deep and lasting scar on your nation's psyche and its treasury. The calendar has turned over into a new century, the 1700s. You are an old man now, your hands gnarled from a lifetime of hauling on wet ropes, your face a creased map of distant harbors and forgotten storms. You sit on a bollard on a wharf in Amsterdam, the taste of cheap gin on your tongue, and you watch the ships in the harbor. The forest of masts is still there, but the trees have changed. Your eyes, which can identify a ship's type from miles away, see fewer and fewer of the familiar, tubby, pear-shaped hulls you grew up with. The Fluyt is still here, of course, the old workhorse still shuttling bulk cargo, but it looks dated. It looks slow, like a comfortable, well-worn walking shoe next to a modern running sneaker. The new ships that dominate the harbor are sleeker, sharper, and carry themselves with an aggressive grace. The world has changed, and the ships have changed with it. You watch as a warship cuts its way through the harbor traffic. It's a frigate. This is the new queen of the seas. The term used to be a loose one, but now it means something very specific. It is a vessel built for speed and power, a perfect blend of a scout and a predator. It has a single long gun deck bristling with cannons, and a sail plan that allows it to sail circles around your old Fluyt. If the Fluyt was the reliable, economical cargo van of the 17th century, the frigate is the souped-up highway patrol interceptor of the 18th, designed specifically to hunt ships like it. The Fluyt's old defense strategy of just run is a joke against a vessel like this. It's not just the warships that have changed. The merchant vessels are different too. The age of the purely specialized unarmed cargo ship is over. The lessons of the Anglo-Dutch wars were brutal and clear. In a world of professional navies and long-range privateers, every merchantman needs to be able to look after itself. The new East Indiamen being built by the English and French are massive multi-decked vessels. They are designed to carry both vast amounts of cargo and a formidable battery of guns. They are a return to the compromise of the old carrack, part merchant, part warship, but they are a far more sophisticated and effective version. Speed is now a critical component of profitability. A faster voyage means less time for the crew to get sick, less exposure to pirates, and a quicker return on your investment. The Fluyt, designed to be cheap and capacious, is fundamentally slow. Its reign is over. You see in the ships the story of your nation. The Dutch Golden Age, that explosive century of innovation and dominance, is fading. The crippling cost of the wars, combined with the fierce state-sponsored competition from a resurgent England and a powerful France, has taken its toll. Historians still debate the primary cause of the Dutch Republic's relative decline in the 18th century, citing factors from military exhaustion to economic competition to a kind of societal complacency after the explosive innovation of the Golden Age. Sitting on this dock, you have your own theory. You simply built the perfect tool for a world that no longer exists. Back in my day, you mutter to a passing seagull, "We cared about how much grain you could fit in the hold. not how fast you could flee from a French privateer. It's a sign of declining standards. The sun is setting, casting a long golden light across the waters of the IJ, an English merchant ship. Its sails catching the evening breeze, heads out to sea with an agility your old Fluyt could never muster. It feels like the sun is setting on an era. The age of the ugly, cheap, and brilliantly specialized cargo hauler has passed. It created a world of integrated global trade and fierce national rivalries, and that world now demands faster, stronger, and more versatile ships. The Fluyt looks like a relic, a creature from a previous age, destined for the scrapyard. But you know that its spirit, the revolutionary idea it represents, has not disappeared. It has simply gone undercover, embedded in the DNA of every ship that now sails the seas. You push yourself up from the cold, hard bollard, your old bones creaking in protest. The sun has dipped below the horizon, and the lights from the windows of the canal houses are beginning to shimmer on the dark water. The new, fast ships are shadows now, and the old Fluyt you were watching has become just another bulky shape in the deepening twilight. Its time has passed, but as you turn to walk home, you realize its legacy is not in the ships themselves, but in the very air you breathe, in the wealth of the city around you, and in the way the entire world now thinks about the sea. The Fluyt is like the ugly, clunky, but revolutionary first smartphone. The models that came after are sleeker, faster, and have more features, but they are all still working on the fundamental principles that the Fluyt introduced. You see its DNA everywhere. That sleek New English frigate, it's a specialist, a dedicated warship. The idea of not compromising, of building a vessel for a single optimized purpose, is a lesson it learned from you, that massive new merchantman. Its owners and builders are obsessed with the ratio of crew size to tonnage, with minimizing operating costs, with turning a profit. The Dutch basically invented the concept of min-maxing for shipbuilding. They put all their skill points into cargo capacity and low operating cost and left coolness and fighting ability at zero. They taught their rivals that the most important weapon in a commercial empire isn't a cannon, but a well-kept ledger. Economists and historians still debate whether the Fluyt's greatest legacy was its physical design or the capitalist, profit-driven mindset that created it. A philosophy that has come to dominate the modern global economy. The ship was merely the perfect expression of a radical idea, that the sea was not just a battlefield for kings or a path to glory for explorers, but a vast global marketplace waiting to be exploited with ruthless efficiency. You can draw a straight line from your ugly, pear-shaped vessel to the colossal container ships of a distant future. Those floating shoeboxes stacked high with identical metal containers are the Fluyt's logical endpoint. They are brutally unadorned, operated by a tiny, technologically assisted crew, and designed with a single-minded devotion to moving the maximum volume of goods for the lowest possible cost. They are the descendants, the children of the revolution you started in a smoky room in Horn. And what became of the ships themselves, your old sturdy Fluyts? There were no grand museums for them, no honored retirements. Their end was as pragmatic and unglamorous as their life. As this very harbor of Amsterdam was expanded to accommodate the ever-increasing traffic the Fluyts themselves had created, the old, worn-out vessels were given one last job. They were filled with stones, towed into position, and deliberately scuttled. They were sunk to the bottom of the IJ, their sturdy, pine-built hulls forming the foundations for the new breakwaters and quays. Their final act was to become a literal part of the bedrock of the prosperity they had helped build. You smile a little at the thought. It's a perfectly Dutch ending. You pull your coat tight against the night chill and begin the walk home. They build them prettier now, you think. But you can bet the merchants who own them are still counting every guilder, just like you did. Some things never change. The ship is gone, but the world it made is everywhere. And so our journey through the age of sail comes to a quiet and gentle close. The echoes of crashing waves and creaking timbers beginning to fade into the soft hum of the world around you. The story of that strange, ungainly ship is now a part of your own quiet history, a memory that can drift and float as you begin to settle deeper into your own comfortable harbor of sleep. Let the images of the past recede, the scent of salt and exotic spices giving way to the familiar and reassuring stillness of your own room. The great, tumultuous ocean of history is calm now, and the small, sturdy vessel of your consciousness, can finally drop anchor in the peaceful waters of a deep and restful slumber. There are no more storms to endure, no more watches to stand, only the gentle, rhythmic swell of your own breathing, carrying you peacefully toward the morning light.